Okay, we're going to continue my series of painting each of the orc clans. This time, we're painting a Badmoon orc. So, this is my first time painting a Badmoon orc, and I was looking around on the internet for some inspiration, and there's a guy I know on Instagram that has some amazing Badmoons. His name is @Strandhammer on Instagram. Throwing up some of his work here. Beautiful orcs, nice and gritty, has this Wild West, dusty, grimy, real potent, saturated color, something that really kind of inspired me. Although he was an inspiration, I actually ended up going in a completely different direction. These are the colors I ended up using in my Badmoon. Some of them were good choices, some not so good. And we'll talk about that. So, this video is going to be a little bit longer and a little bit less formulaic than some of my other videos up to this point. That is because I've actually left in some of my mistakes here in the video. I went into this model without much of a plan, especially with color choices, and was winging it, and I got to a point where I really wasn't happy with the miniature and had to make some drastic changes. But you know, that's part of miniature painting, right? Is that you experiment with something, you give it a shot. If it doesn't work, you take it in another direction. So I left in some of that stuff into the video. I'll talk about it a little bit as I go through the steps, and you'll let me know what you think, if I made the right choices here in the end. So you can see at this point, I've based in the Rhinox hide and the Scrag Brown on all the leathery strappy bits, and I'm putting in the XV88 as kind of my real base color for the yellow. My approach to the yellow really was thinking that like I would build from this kind of ochre deep yellow color and kind of work up lighter from it. I know a lot of the other painters that want a real bright yellow kind of work from a white. I kind of wanted to experiment a little bit and see if I was able to come up with a nice color from that. Here I blocked in some of the metals. You can see I like to start all my dark metals with the Warplock Bronze on the big gun. There was a lot of bullets on this guy, so I used the Hashnut Copper and a little Lead Belcher here as some of the base coats on some of the metallic. So just like my other orcs, I tend to like to lay in all the base colors, do a little bit of weathering work, and then come in with a wash. And I see that as kind of like my first stage in the painting process. And then I come back and start doing the highlighting and the detail work and the real weathering to kind of start to bring it to life. So here you go. I'm just showing you a little bit, how much I pull off the brush when I'm doing the little dry brush of Lead Belcher there to just give the metal kind of that worn effect. This is something I do on my Evil Sunz boys that works great with the red, and so it was something I'm going to give it a try with the yellow. All right, and then again, I was building up to this point, but going in with an Agrex Earthshade wash. Just being very liberal with it as usual. You want to just be conscious that it's not pooling on you. Something kind of strange, and this is kind of where my mistakes started, especially with the base coat of the Scrag Brown, is I washed the leathery bits with the Druchii Violet wash, thinking, in my mind that yellow and purple were contrasting colors and that would really give the leather a real contrasted look. Here's a couple of shots of the orc after the wash is dried. You can see I painted in the details of the face and the skin. I kind of work in the same stages of steps. All right, so I'm going to start. I always start with like the harder to reach bits. So I was working with the cloth, and then I was going to work the leather, and then eventually onto the yellow bits. So here I'm starting with the cloth parts that his shirt. I'm using Rhinox hide and Reicharth flesh you can see on the palette there's a little transition of color there, and I'm going to just kind of work up in stages, layers, just laying in some color on the parts that I wanted to use this brown. It was really these browns that between the leather and, on the boots and on his shirt that over time I really started to not like how the model was coming out. He was very one note. There was not much contrast, and it turned out that the leathery kind of looking bits ended up kind of stealing the show. They were drawing the eye more than the yellow, and that's really, I wanted the yellow to stand out. You know, it's a Badmoon Ork, it's all about the yellow, right? So I really left in a lot of the paintwork here in this video. I spent a while working on the browns and the leather, trying to kind of punch up the highlights and bring some texture into the miniature. I know in some of my other videos people were asking for me to kind of do an extended cut. I feel like the videos would be really just far too long. So I just tried to leave in some more time of me working on the pieces, even if some of this is going to get redone. Like the next stages that I'm going to do next are those leather strappings, and that's really where I think the issues with this model ended up lying, were that reddish brown. It ended up kind of detracting from everything else. You can see I just kind of bounce between the transition on the palette with the Rykar flesh, and that allows me to kind of create some color transitions. That's always a nice strategy if you know you're going to be highlighting an area, is to create like a light, mid-tone, and shadow color, and just be able to kind of work the colors between those three. I started highlighting the red-brown leather with Doombull brown. I approached the strapping much like I did with the Goth and the Evil Sunz boy. I tend to start with just sort of edging the strapping and then coming back and texturing it, you know, giving some visual interest. I tend to not really fuss over like perfect blends and transitions, especially on a test miniature like this. I'm not painting for a competition. I'm painting up something that I really want to looks really nice on the tabletop, photographs well, has some visual interest, but probably is not going to win a Golden Demon. Okay, you can see this is where I was at so far. Not a whole lot of contrast on the miniature, but I hadn't gotten to the yellow yet. So I did a little black lining. Basically, you're drawing a thin black line between the more pronounced areas between the details, kind of in the recessed areas. This helps really kind of define elements. I think it's something important to do occasionally, and it also helps you clean up your work a little bit. You really need a nice sharp point to do this. Alright, so finally I got to tackle the yellow. I had been waiting for it. So I was going to step up from the Zamizi desert color and up to the Ural yellow. Boy, those are a mouthful. You can see I tried to keep the yellows real thin. You know, yellow goes on very differently than some of the other colors. It has kind of a chalky quality to it, a little bit like some of the whites. I tried to show that, you know, I was trying to keep it thin and create some interesting texture and transitions on the yellow. As I said, I'm going to leave in more of the footage of me just working the colors. I spent quite a bit of time kind of slowly building up the yellow, kind of trying to get a feel for the color in the paint a little bit. It was definitely fighting me. I was missing working with the reds that I normally do. So you can see I pulled in the Uriel yellow. It starts to really kind of saturate it and brighten it up a little bit. I tried to approach it so that I could add some texture to the yellow as I go. I lightened up the yellow a little bit. I mixed a little pallid witch flesh into the Uriel yellow. I just tried to edge some of the more prominent parts, really trying to kind of make the yellow pop a little bit before I did some of the weathering. Okay, I'm back with using the black, doing some more black lining and hatching in some scratch marks to start the weathering. I had to jump back to the yellow sometimes to just kind of pick out some details that I had missed. You know, that's the tough part about these videos is I generally don't work one color at a time. I generally bounce between colors, so sometimes it shows up in the videos. Okay, I came in with a real light yellow just to highlight the scratches and kind of pick out some of the real hard edges. And then finally pulled out the Vallejo rust oxide kind of using this like typhus corrosion. This was my first time using this product, and I'm definitely going to have to experiment with it a little bit more. I didn't have a lot of surface area to work with. It is supposed to be a textured product, a lot like the typhus corrosion, with a little bit of grit in there that allows you to kind of really make that nice rust texture. I didn't get really the texture that I was looking for, but it definitely added to the weathering effect. I actually tried to put some of it on here, you can see, with a sponge. So since I didn't get the real gritty effect in some areas, I came back with a little bit heavier coat of the typhus corrosion in some of those spots to just get that grit that looks like that oxidized metal. Put a little bit of the typhus corrosion on the boots too. We can kind of see where the weathering was at this point. So I use these on my Goth Boy, but here are the washes from Vallejo, the dark rust and the rust oxide. I started to kind of bring that coloration into some of the recessed areas, and especially those regions that I just hit with the typhus corrosion. I wanted to kind of punch up that rusty orange color, add some streaking to some of the rivets and bolts. Okay, so I pulled out the iron breaker. This is where I wanted to sort of just get that fresh chipped effect on the rust, where like parts of the metal had worn away and it was like fresh metal. Use this to pick out some of the details. Okay, so I did use the sponge again with the iron breaker. This is always nice to get that kind of stippled, textured effect with the metal. It was quick, put it on the end of the barrel, just a little bit on the metal bits. So it was at this point when I was kind of wrapping up that I really, again, like I said earlier in the video, was not pleased with where this miniature was. I really felt that there needed to be more contrast and some visual interest. So you can see here, this is where I was at this point. It's not terrible, but really the rust and the yellow doesn't stand out. So I kind of took a risk and went back and just took a black and blackened in all of the leather bits. And you can see that made a pretty big difference all of a sudden there's that contrast between the yellow and the black that kind of punches things up quite a bit. And I haven't even done any work to that black. You can see, actually, I even felt like there needed to be some freehand work. So I came in, and here was just scribbling in some flames down on the bottom of his little loincloth there. You can see with drawing in flames, you start from the top tip and work down to the thicker area. It gives you a nice little effect. So like I said, I'm leaving in more paintwork in this video, and you'll tell me if you like it. So I redid all the straps, came back in with the standard Mechanicus gray, kind of my standard combo here for blacks. I like this gray a lot for a highlight color. It sort of has a cooler quality to it, that gray, which again I thought would punch up the contrast against the warm colors in the yellow. So I approach the strapping again very similar way. That part of my painting the orc seems to be a little formulaic. Maybe it's just something I'm comfortable with, but I just edge out the straps, and then I will kind of periodically lighten the color and come in with some of that hatching texture to kind of draw your eye into certain spots. Okay, so I used the Oil Earth wash from Vallejo on all the black bits that I just had been working on. This helped to kind of knock back some of the highlights a little bit and kind of give it that gritty, earthy quality. This is a great little wash because it's not too overpowering, but it kind of filters the color with sort of that grimy look a little bit, and helps kind of bring it in with everything else on the miniature. You can see I also got a little impatient there and dried it with my hair dryer that I keep by my workstation all the time. I was then going to come in with the brighter highlight, which I just mixed some pallid witch flesh into the standard Mechanicus gray to really kind of punch up certain parts of the strapping. I always think it's important to highlight in stages, especially if you're really trying to draw the eye to somewhere on the miniature. Okay, so this is where I was at with the black, the strapping, the leather. I think it looks a lot better than that reddish brown so far. The next step, I was going to work on the horn on his helmet and some of those teeth on his belt. Had the Screaming Skull, the Steel Leech and Drab, and the Rhinox hide. So I started with just basing with the Screaming Skull, but I'm going to be working from a light color to a dark on the tip. You can kind of do this in reverse if you want. I'm pretty sure natural horns and bones work from a light to a dark as they age. So once I had the Screaming Skull based in, the general concept is that you're going to just layer in the colors. I've mixed between the colors to create stages here, but you basically create like little star patterns from the tip and then periodically work down with a darker color in that star pattern. I didn't do it perfectly here for sure. I had to come back later on and sort of clean up a little bit, and it's something I'm still practicing. But you get that kind of ribbed horn look if you're able to create that sort of star pattern, with enough color transitions to step it down. Okay, so I wanted to really up the weathering a little bit on this guy, really kind of muck him up a bit. So I just took the typhus corrosion with a sponge. I wanted to get it on the loincloth and the boots a little bit, like he's been traipsing through something dirty and nasty, kind of worn and older. He was looking a little too clean and slick for me. And then the Rise of Rust, I just showed you the palette there, just real thin down on the rusty patches, kind of floated a thin layer of Rise of Rust into the textured areas to just punch up the rust color. From this point out, really, the rest is cleanup work. I'm coming back with some of the colors that I've used before to pick out pieces that either need a little attention or I want to draw some attention to. You know, there are portions of the gun that I had worked over the yellow. I wanted to kind of bring that back a little bit. You can see here, I actually did the kind of heat effect on the gun. I have that in my video of painting the quote-unquote rest of the Ork, on how I do that process with the washes. I came back with the iron breaker here to just kind of brighten up certain little edged pieces, kind of, again, just punching up where I had weathered a little bit and wanted to kind of clean up some of my work. It's amazing how long you can spend working on bullets. Again, came back with the hashnut copper to kind of punch up the bullets again and clean them up, just to sort of edge the little casings of the bullets and kind of create distinction between the silver parts of the bullets. I also did a little freehanding of some moons on there, just again to kind of add to the theme a little bit. Felt like it would be fun to sort of incorporate that into the strapping a little bit. Cleaning up some of the leather bits here with the Mechanicus Gray. This is always a usual process in my painting, you know, is that I'll come back with colors and really try to touch on the pieces that I just don't think look quite right. This is why sometimes painting a miniature can take a little while, is, you know, you keep reworking an area, retouching an area, reapplying a highlight, finding what looks visually appealing. Okay, and that really was the end of the miniature. I did some light dusting on the boots with the airbrush and coated this sucker with a clear coat, popped him on the base. I was pretty happy with how he came out. I would definitely do things very differently if I approached it next time with the contrast building on the miniature. I actually kind of like how the yellows came out. They were kind of muted, have some of those mustard tones. So you guys let me know what you think. I appreciate you guys watching. You can always follow me over at Quarter Paint on Instagram. Maybe one of these days I'll have a Patreon. And next up is the Death Skulls.